All right, today we are diving deep into a really fascinating company that's sitting right at the crossroads of infrastructure, engineering, and, you guessed it, artificial intelligence. They're called Ceinsys Tech, and believe me, they are making some seriously big moves. So let's get into it. But to really get what they do, we got to start with a pretty wild question. How do you take something like a digital map and turn it into a multi-billion rupee pipeline of business? Sounds kind of crazy, right? Well, that is exactly the puzzle that Ceinsys has been solving.
And let me tell you, they haven't just been solving it, they have been absolutely crushing it. The first thing you really need to wrap your head around with Ceinsys is that its recent performance has been nothing short of a juggernaut.
I mean, just take a look at this. Kicking off the new fiscal year, their revenue in Q1 shot up by 112% compared to the same time last year. That's not just growth, that's more than doubling your top line, your total income, in just 12 months. Wow.
And if you thought that was impressive, check this out. Their net profit, well, that jumped by a massive 166%. So this isn't just about getting bigger, right? This shows they're getting way more efficient and profitable.
And look, this isn't some one-hit wonder or a fluke. This growth is built on a really powerful, consistent trend. You can see it right here. Over the last 3 fiscal years, they've gone from about 2,200 million rupees to over 4,100 million. That is some serious momentum they're building up.
And the foundation for what's coming next, it looks even stronger. Get this, they have an order book of over 12,000 million rupees. Now, to put that into perspective for you, that's almost 3 times their entire revenue from last year. This gives them this incredible visibility into what their earnings are going to look like down the road.
Okay, so you see numbers like these, and you have to ask the big questions, don't you? What on earth is the engine behind this machine? And maybe more importantly, is it actually built to last? Are there any red flags we need to be paying attention to?
And that brings us to the other side of the coin. Because while that growth is absolutely undeniable, if you dig a little deeper, you find that credit rating agencies like Care Ratings have pointed out some pretty significant risks lurking just beneath the surface, kind of like cracks in the foundation. So here's risk number 1, and honestly, it is a biggie. An incredible 90%, you heard that right, 90% of that massive order book comes from a single sector, the water domain. That is a huge concentration. You know, if anything wobbles in that one area, it could have a massive ripple effect on the whole company. And that one big risk, it creates a kind of domino effect. Because so much of their business is in water, it means they're super reliant on government contracts. In fact, just 2 major orders make up about 60% of their entire backlog. This kind of work is also what the finance folks call working capital intensive. We'll explain that in a sec. And it makes them really vulnerable to any delays in government programs, all while trying to make it in a fiercely competitive industry.
So what does working capital intensive actually mean in plain English? Well, it's pretty simple, really. It means when you do a big job for the government, it can take a long time to get paid. We're talking 120, maybe even 150 days. This means a ton of your cash gets tied up while you're just waiting for those payments to come through, and that can really put a squeeze on your finances.
And this isn't just a theoretical risk. You know, this stuff really happens. Here's a quote from the company's own CEO, Prashant Kamath. He explained on an earnings call that the big orders they were expecting from a key water program, the Jal Jeevan mission, were put on hold because the government decided to audit everything. Now, he's optimistic. He says the guidance was just delayed, it didn't vanish, but it's a perfect example of this dependency. So you're faced with these pretty serious risks. What's the plan? Well, this is where the story gets really interesting. Ceinsys isn't just sitting back and hoping for the best. Nope. They are making a very deliberate, very strategic pivot. And it all starts with a huge bet on technology. They're basically evolving. They're shifting away from their traditional services, mapping, design, data analysis, and they're becoming a high-tech solutions provider. The big idea here is something called digital twins. They're creating these incredibly detailed, AI-driven virtual replicas of real-world assets, like entire cities or utility networks. This lets you predict problems and make decisions in real time.
It's a huge move from just providing a service to selling a very valuable, high-margin technology product.
And guess what? The pivot is already paying off big time. In Q1, their traditional services segment grew by a very healthy 72%, but their new technology solutions segment, that grew by a staggering 167%. This is the high-margin part of their business, and it is growing more than twice as fast. That is a great sign.
But that tech pivot is only half the story. The second part of their strategy is just as ambitious: to aggressively reduce that risk from relying on India by expanding all over the globe.
Management has laid out the super clear 3-year plan. It's all about tackling that concentration risk we talked about. They plan to use strategic acquisitions, that's M&A, in the US and Europe to transform the whole business. And here's the wild part. The goal is to completely flip their revenue mix. They want to go from being a 70% India-based business today to being a 60 or even 70% international business within just 3 years. I mean, that is a massive strategic overhaul. So, after looking at the incredible growth, the underlying risks, and this bold strategic plan to transform the company, what's the final verdict? Let's break it down into a simple bull versus bear case.
On one hand, the bull case, the argument for why this could all go incredibly well, it's compelling. You've got that explosive growth, that huge order book giving you visibility, and a really smart pivot to high-margin AI and a clear global plan. But the bear case is just as real. You can't ignore the over-reliance on government contracts and that heavy concentration in the water sector. We know for a fact that government delays can and do happen. And pulling off such an ambitious global M&A strategy, well, there's a huge execution risk there. It's a classic high-risk, high-reward situation. And so it all comes down to this one final question. Ceinsys is making a huge bet that it can engineer its own future using AI and global expansion. But will they successfully pull it off and manage all that execution risk? Or will the very real dangers of government dependency and sector concentration end up derailing that ambitious vision? That right there is the multi-billion rupee question they're trying to answer. Thanks for watching.